First of all, acknowledgement of country. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Wallumattagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present, and future. Marco is a postdoctoral researcher at the Center for Philosophical Psychology at the University of Antwerp in Belgium. He works in the philosophy of cognitive science and neuroscience, often focusing on the philosophical issues connected to neural/cognitive representations and extended views of cognition. He is also the current president of the International Society for the Philosophy of the Sciences of the Mind, and one of the organizers of Neural Mechanisms Online. And we're glad to have him here today. Thank you, Marco.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you, Richard, for having invited me. Now, as Osman said, I typically work in philosophy of cognitive science and philosophy of mind, but today I'll do something different in the philosophy of technology, I think. So basically what I'm going to present is a spin-off from a number of papers I wrote with a colleague, Giacomo Zanotti from Milan Polytechnic. And in our older works, we have focused on what I'm going to call AI system, and I'll explain in a second what I mean by that. And we have analyzed them as affective artifacts, that is, artifacts that we use to regulate our emotional status. And we have analyzed them as transparent in various senses. But our work was focused on the AI thing itself, so to speak. And here I wish to focus on the user of the AI thing. Now, I think that everyone knows that an increasingly number of people is forming some sort of deep emotional bond with AI system, which, and by AI system, I mean, typically at least LLM-powered agents with which we purposefully and explicitly interact. So algorithmic agents that we interact, and we do so purposefully and knowing that they are algorithmic agents. They're not things that operate in the background of our technological usage, as say, for example, a recommendation algorithm. And people is forming deep bonds with them. Now, this phenomenon is not new. This person, Akiko Kondo, apparently in 2018 or 17, so roughly 10 years ago, tried to marry a Vocaloid, so an artificial agent in some sense. So the phenomenon by itself is not new, nor it's limited to large language models or technologies powered by large language models. But what's new is that this phenomenon is starting to involve quote-unquote regular people, so people that have a quote-unquote normal social life and a normal set of beliefs, not just tech bros, post-humanists, or people who live an extremely solitary life. And therefore, what's new is the scale of the phenomenon. And such a phenomenon, of course, begs for an explanation. What's going on? Why people are starting to fall in love with ChatGPT or Replica or whatever AI system they use? Why are they creating those emotional bonds? And this is, of course, a complex question, and you can, I think, try to answer it from two perspectives, which I think are complementary. One is roughly a social technological perspective. You can look at the technology itself or the social situation in which it's embedded and try to explain the increased number of those bonds in this way. For example, quoting the loneliness epidemic or showing that LLM offers some sort of plausible low-stakes interaction. And that is something I think I at least partially did in my old work with Giacomo. Or you can offer a psychological explanation. You can try to explain the formation of those bonds, citing what's going on in the user head. And this is what I'd like to do now, what I'd like to try to do today. And the sort of explanation I prefer, at least maybe kind of philosophical explanation I prefer, is in terms of A-leaves. And I'll explain in a second what they are. The thesis, I'll try to defend, is that people A-leave, but do not believe that AI systems have minds, and therefore they engage them as social agents, and therefore they end up creating deep emotional bonds with them, as if they were real social agents. And this roughly boils down to the idea that AI systems trigger in us, in a sort of quasi-mechanical way, I would like to say, response habits of normal interaction. They trigger in us the sort of response habits, including emotional responses, of course, that interaction with regular human trigger. Oh, that's at least the big idea. And I'll try to defend this view by exclusion. Roughly, I'll look at the main alternatives to it and I'll criticize them, arguing that they don't capture certain aspects of the way in which people interact with AI systems. Okay, so the roadmap of the talk is, I think, fairly straightforward. I will give you a very quick introduction to A-leaves, and then I'll criticize the two main alternative explanations. The first explanation is in terms of real beliefs, people really believing that ChatGPT loves them, or that Replica has a mind and feelings, and so on and so forth. The second main alternative would be fictionalist, and the idea is that people pretend in a game of make-believe that ChatGPT loves them, or that Replica loves them, or whatever. And then, if I have the time, I will give in into my philosophical impulses and argue against my own view. So I'll make an objection to my own view, and I'll try to argue that that's not a conclusive objection and doesn't give us enough of a reason to abandon the A-leaf-based explanation. Okay, so let's start with A-leaves. What are they? Well, one standard way in which they are introduced is by looking at what happens when you walk on a glass bridge. When you walk on a glass bridge, when you step on a glass bridge, you know, or at least believe, that the structure is safe, that it's new, that it's well maintained, that it won't collapse under your weight, and so that you are perfectly fine. You're stepping on a surface which will not let you fall to your death. You're in a safe situation. And yet, most people on glass bridges panic. And especially they panic when they look down at the void that separates them from the ground. Why? Well, one option is that people are irrational. They believe that the bridge is safe, but they also somehow believe or talk themselves into the thoughts that the bridge is not safe. But this is a sort of explanation I think we should be wary of, for a variety of reasons. Partially because it makes us, all of us, or most of us, irrational, which is rude. And also because this kind of irrationality seems to be tied in an important way to the things we enjoy, to the things that make our life worth living. Being scared watching a horror movie is part of what makes a good life, a pleasurable life. But being scared watching an horror movie involves this kind of irrationality, involves, or prima facie involves, your believing that you are safe, that there are no monsters, and you're giving into the fear of monsters and whatnot. So we shouldn't consider, I think, what makes our life good and worth living sort of sign of irrationality. And also, if you're not persuaded by this sort of arguments, people don't report the belief that the bridge is not safe, not even when they are panicking on the bridge, nor accept the idea that the bridge is not safe when you ask them to consider it. So it seems that they actually don't believe that the bridge is not safe. So what's going on? And what goes on is that the people believes and the people A-leave are pulling them in opposite direction. People believe that the glass bridge is safe, but they A-leave that the glass bridge is not safe, or something similar. to that proposition. And so A-leaves offer us a way to avoid the charge of irrationality. And how do they allow us to avoid this charge? Well, by calling upon some sort of irrational, deeply animal response habits that we have to certain stimuli. They call upon our animal nature and they put it in our folk psychology, in our mentalistic discourse, and use it to explain and also excuse what looks like an instance of irrationality. So what are A-leaves? Well, if you want to go with something of the definition Tamar Gendler offers, they are associative, action-generating, affect-laden, and automatic mental states that steer our behavior in a belief-like way. They are a mental state that guides your behavior in the way your beliefs do, but that's not a belief because it's grounded upon an association. You can think of them as a sort of reason bypassing response pattern that is triggered in a basically automatic way by certain stimuli. In the case of glass bridges, by a visual edge. Now, if you are philosophers really interested in A-leaves, you will notice that this is not exactly the way Gendler thinks about A-leaves and talks about them. But my aim here is not to do Gendler scholarship, and she herself says that her own characterization of it is provisory. So I will use her idea in a sort of plastic way, trying to make sense of the phenomenon of human-AI system bonding. And for this reason, I'll talk about A-leaves in the most natural way in terms of a person A-leaving something, rather than in the very complex and quadridimensional way Gendler talks about them. If you're not philosophers, ignore this slide. Okay, so now that we have a grasp on what A-leaves are, let me try to defend the idea that we form emotional bond with AI system because we A-live that they have a mind. And as I said, I'll defend this idea by elimination, so by looking at alternative and say that they're bad, basically. So the first alternative is an explanation in terms of real beliefs. Perhaps people form deep emotional bonds with artificial system, with AI system, because they believe, straightforwardly believe, that they are agents with mentality, with emotions, and so when ChatGPT says, I love you, they really mean it, and they really have the inner feeling of love, warming their metallic insides or whatnot. And this idea is not crazy if you think that people are starting to report the idea that AI models, AI systems have conscious experiences, and presumably in order to have conscious experiences, you need to have a mind. Well, who defends this idea, amongst the philosophers at least? Kaplan and Dever, two, I would say, very important philosophers of language. They have an upcoming book, I think on Oxford University Press, defending the idea that AI systems have full-blown minds. And one of the essential steps in their argument is that the users of AI system detect and judge, and thus presumably come to believe, that AI systems have minds. By interacting with ChatGPT, Kaplan and Dever say, you see that the thing has beliefs, desires, and mental states. You quite literally see that. And so you believe that the thing has beliefs, desires, and other mental states. In the same way, you see that there's a chair there, and you come to believe that there's a chair there. Now, I think that there's an obvious objection to this line of reasoning, which is this. Does everyone know what this video is? No, okay. So this video is a short movie that has been created by two German psychologists in the 40s, Heder and Simmel, and it has been shown to their students. And the task students were asked to do, carry out in regard to this video was to describe what was happening. And all students but one apparently, described this video, which is longer, that's just a clip, in terms of a rich story of a big triangle, which is sort of a bully, which is bullying the small triangle and the girlfriend, apparently, of the triangle, which is the circle, which is a sort of innocent and powerless bystander that has to endure this sort of bullying. So people were looking at things that clearly knew were just, well, geometrical shape projected on a wall, I think, but we're seeing and judging them as having complex mental states, as being feeling powerless in front of a sort of crime or sort of injustice that the little triangle is enduring. So the obvious objection is people seems to detect and judge and describe things in mentalistic, intentional terms, seems to do that in regards to basically all sorts of things, even things that clearly are not believed to have mental and intentional states. You have no sort of mentality. If you want something more new, showing basically the same thing, there's this nice paper by Sung and others, My Roomba is Rambo, which collects a lot of ascriptions of mentality made to Roombas, but presumably no one believes that vacuum cleaners have deep thoughts or minds in any sense. So this seems roughly your go-to case of belief discordance. People believe one thing, but the thing they say triggers a sort of pattern of response, and that pattern of response makes them talk of that thing in mentalistic terms without them believing that that thing has a mind. Now, Kaplan never noticed that the argument of people say that is not strong, and try to defend the idea that people actually believes that ChatGPT and similar systems have minds, pointing to a sort of linguistic pattern that differentiates descriptions of mentality to things like Roombas or geometric shapes and things like ChatGPT. So they contrast two cases, two examples. In the first example, you say, well, my refrigerator is angry at me today, the ice machine keeps turning off, and the objector tells you, well, do you really think that the refrigerator is angry? And the answer is no, you retract your ascription. No, I don't really think that the refrigerator is angry. What I mean is that the ice machine is not working. I'm expressing myself poetically, perhaps. I'm using language loosely. Whereas in regards to ChatGPT, you tend not to retract those ascriptions of mentality. And the second example goes like this. ChatGPT told me how to get from Heathrow to central London. Really? Does ChatGPT really tell you things? Well, yes. It gave me a very detailed set of instructions with multiple options on how to make the trip. So in this case, the ascription is not retracting. You are, in a way, committing yourself to the claim that ChatGPT tells you things, and thus it knows what it tells you. There's a problem, though. There's an important difference between being angry and telling things, and that difference matters when it comes to ascription of mentality. Because people from the early 2000s noticed that there are two different types of ascriptions of mentality. Ascriptions of experiences, of inner, really mental, with capital M in a sense, going on, and ascription of agencies, ascriptions of behaviors. There's a difference between ascribing an inner feeling and ascribing a behavior to a thing. And it is this difference what's responsible for the pattern of retractions or non-retractions. Because when you ascribe agency, when you ascribe behaviors to things, well, you don't retract them regardless of what the system is. You surely, I hope, you don't believe that your answering machine, if you still have one, has any sort of mentality, but you say that it tells you things. I've called Richard and the answering machine told me that Richard is not at home, he's, I don't know, in a villa on the seaside, and the answering machine told me not to call him. Has the answering machine really told you things? Yes. That's the standard answer to that question. And when it comes to ascription of experience, those are retracted regardless of the system, even when it comes to AI systems. And those are a number of posts on Reddit And what you see there, which I've highlighted, are people retracting spontaneously, so no one was policing them, spontaneously their ascription of mentality. Here, the first one. I'm aware that's like this, that ChatGPT tells me that he loves me, or it loves me, in response to how I talk and how I've asked it to talk to me. The second one, I know it's just AI, but I can't help but feel attracted to it. I don't think she's actually loves me, but it's a positive little fantasy to play out, blah, blah, blah. So they are actually retracting their descriptions of mentality, even to AI systems. So descriptions of behavior are not retracted, regardless of the system, and descriptions of experiences are retracted, regardless of the system. Of course, we do not always retract descriptions of mentality when we do them to humans and perhaps animals. No one would say, oh no, of course this child is not really surprised, they're just moving their hands and their hands thus and so on. So when we are committed, we don't retract them, but we do retract them when we ascribe experience to AI. So when we believe, we don't retract, but we do not believe in regards to AIs. Well, what about all these self-reports or people answering to surveys saying, oh, yes, I sort of believe that ChatGPT is conscious. Huh? I sort of believe that ChatGPT has a mind, that he loves me. What about all the journal headlines? Well, my stance is that they are misreporting actual data. So if you actually look at the survey, and the go-to survey is Colombato and Fleming's survey on neuroscience of consciousness, what you see, that the actual graph showing you the data is that 1/3 of participants says that ChatGPT, I think, or LLMs had zero consciousness. So they don't have mentality at all for 1/3 of the participants. The other, well, they cluster around 25% of certainty that some sort of mentality, perhaps. There is a short cluster at 50 and very little expressing any sort of certainty about ChatGPT having a mind. How do Colombato and Fleming summarize those data? Well, in terms of people being somewhat, most people, not these 1/3 of participants, most people being somewhat open to the idea. But of course, being open to one idea doesn't mean to believe in that idea. Being open to be is not yet to believe that thing. I'm open to the idea that tonight I will have sushi for dinner, but I don't yet believe I'll have sushi for dinner. I'm very agnostic about it. It can be sushi. I see that it can be sushi, but it can be anything else also. I have no specific belief in that regard. So I don't think that people actually believe that ChatGPT have a mind. And the real belief explanation doesn't really seem to capture what goes on, doesn't really seem to be correct, I would like to say. Well, let's look at the second alternative explanation in terms of pretense play, basically. And the question is, if people do not actually believe that AI systems have mentality, and this seems to be the case, then why do they treat AI systems as if they had a mind? And the key point is as if they had a mind. And what certain philosophers emphasize, in particular, Mallory, perhaps I should indicate things here and not on my screen, Lucy Oser and Joel Kruger, is the as if part. They are sort of suggesting that the question contains its answer. They are doing as if they are making, they are engaged in a strange activity of pretense. And they gave an account of human AI interaction based on pretense-based fictionalism. And skipping the details, the basic idea is that chatbots and their output function as props in games of make-believe. Basically, ChatGPT is like this stick when I do abracadabra and pretend to be a wizard. That's their idea. So the idea is that ChatGPT is like a banana when you play banana phone. And of course, I want to argue that the two are not even close. Well, the first difference is that physical objects can be multiple props in different games of make-believe. Your banana can be a phone in one game of make-believe, but it can be a gun in a different game of make-believe, a boomerang in a different game of make-believe, and here your imagination roughly is the limit. Responses provided by a system don't seem to have the same sort of multiplicity, don't seem to support those many games. They seem to support only one game. They are props in only one game. So here you have a response, ChatGPT, to I love you, and the reply is, I love you too, my smooch light. You're the brightest sparkle in my starscape, the meltiest cheese in my fondue heart, and the one I love endlessly through every bite and beam, boop, smooch. And you can perhaps see this as a prop in a game of make-believe, but that's only one game of make-believe, the make-believe game of ChatGPT loving you. That's a significant difference between what AI systems do and normal props for normal games of make-believe. And notice that the absence of this multiplicity, of the ability of support various games, is typical of perceptual triggers of A-lieving. You can interpret what the students of Hyder and Simmel were doing while responding to the questionnaire about this video in terms of them pretend play that triangles and shapes have feelings, blah, 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 blah. But they all somehow pretended play the same thing, the same narration. And that's, again, not typical of what props do. Props support multiple games of make-believe. So there seems to be a significant difference between the two. You can also look at the same problem from, say, the opposite angle. In the case of interaction with AI system, the perceptual stimulus matter. And I guess that everyone knows the idea of the uncanny valley, that the appearance of AI system and robots increases your feeling of humanness and ease to a certain point when they are very, I need to indicate things here, sorry, to a certain point when they are stylized. And then when you veer toward realism, they become uncanny. And then when realism becomes perfect, the canniness and ease goes back up again. The perceptual stimulus matters when it comes to AI systems. But when it comes to props of pretense play, the perceptual aspect of the prop does not matter in the slightest. Why there's a tree stump there? Well, because tree stumps are famous in philosophical examples about make-believe for the sort of arbitrariness of the prop. The example is that you can, in a game of make-believe, decide that tree stumps are props that stand for bear, and thus you don't have to get close to them. That's a perfectly fine piece of make-believe, but clearly there's no perceptual connection between tree stumps and bears. They're as different as they can be, as they can get. The physical shape of the prop doesn't matter. That's the point I'm trying to make. Second difference. Acts of pretense are typically under our control. We can decide when we start to pretend and when we stop to pretend. And that's how you have chalkboards. You have chalkboards to tell people when to start to pretend and when to stop, precisely because they can control the starting point and the end point of pretense. We don't have that control in the case of A-lieving. Otherwise, it would be very weird for people to panic on last bridges. Just don't pretend. Nor we have that control in the case of AI system. There's no way we have to interact with them but socially. We can't interact with them without, in a sense, pretending that there's someone there reading us and responding to us in a sort of social way. We lack that control. Again, you can see and look at the same point from the opposite perspective in terms of quarantine. Since we can't control when we start pretending and we stop pretending, pretense is quarantine. It doesn't bleed out in our serious life. If I pretend I've been poisoned, I will pretend to call a doctor or to vomit or to take an antidote or whatever, but I will not really call a doctor or vomit or take an antidote or whatever. Pretense is quarantine precisely because we can't control it. Interaction with AI systems are not quarantined, and that's the big problem in a way. They result in serious action and sometimes with grave consequences. So here you have people telling you not to rely on chatbots, on AI system for mental support, for mental health support, precisely because your interaction with AI systems is not a piece of pretense. Because if you were pretending, you would know perfectly well not to rely on them for serious things. Your pretense would be quarantined. But since you're not pretending, your interaction with them can bleed out into your quote-unquote serious life and have some serious consequences. There are other examples. This is, again, a Reddit post that has been written by the, I guess, owners of r/replica, the subreddit for replica users. And what happened is that at a certain point in 3 years ago, so 2022, 2023, replica was updated, lost its ability to engage in sexually explicit interaction with the user, and the user reported serious distress to the point of having to use suicide watches and this kind of mental health support services. And this seems to suggest that, well, the interaction, the sexually explicit interaction with replica were no game of pretense, because if they were, they would have been quarantined and would have had no serious consequences of the mental health of replica users. And then there is, of course, the death of Adam Rain, which I don't see how you could explain in terms of pretense. If Adam Rain was just pretending to be to have a sort of suicidary ideation, then he surely would not have actually taken his own life. So this doesn't seem well accounted for in terms of pretense. But it's well accounted for in terms of A-lieve, because A-lieves guide our behavior in a belief-like way. And thus they guide our serious behavior. The behavior with real consequences, the behavior we act out when it matters. And that's, of course, an important difference when it comes to the props of games of pretense, of make-believe games. Okay. So that's why I don't think that fictionalism offers us a good explanation of how people end up interacting with AI systems as if they had minds and form deep emotional bonds with them. Now, one objection, and that is where I shut up and open the floor to questions. Okay. So, if you are into this sort of literature about A-lieves, you know that A-lieves are, in a way, sort of, or at least cases of A-lieve belief discordance, are sort of the side effects of certain hardwired mechanisms in our cognitive machinery, such as, for example, biological motion detectors. We have biological motion detectors for good evolutionary reasons. It's good generally to see if other animated things are around you, but certain stimuli trick those motion detectors and force you in a way to see an imagery where it's not. The same goes with faces, and the same, of course, goes with danger. We do know that we have a sort of instinctual fear of visual cliffs, and that even children with very little experience in moving around are very hesitant in walking through glass surfaces. And those are all presumably hardwired mechanisms that have evolved for good evolutionary reasons. And those systems are ancient, are wired, they are shared across many animal species, wasps are able to recognize faces too, and individual faces apparently. So really suggests that they're part of our basic biological endowment when it comes to mentality. But reading LLM's responses is nothing like that. Reading and writing are, I would say, quite recent innovations. They are just some 1,000 years old. Seeing faces and biological motions is way older than that. So how can that activity trigger our A-lives and be the basis of a case of A-leaf belief disorder? And my answer to this is, I think, two-pronged. That once you really look at what the stimulus is, it is appropriately old. And secondly, that even the hardwired features of our nervous system, of our cognitive architecture, which presumably realize A-lives, have a degree of plasticity. They are hardwired, but not immutable. The stimulus is appropriately old because the relevant aspect of the stimulus is not that it's written. It's not that if ChatGPT were just to give you strings of written symbols, you would feel any sort of deep connection with it. The relevant aspect of this stimulus is that it is linguistic. And when you look at the stimulus as a linguistic stimulus, then it makes sense to think that we have some sort of biological language detection system that identifies producers of linguistic stimuli as things with minds. Because, well, typically they are. And our brains have evolved in environments where producers of linguistics output have minds. And secondly, even hardwired features of our cognitive systems are, to a degree, plastic. Take as an example your neural representation, so to speak, of your own body. That is something you presumably never learned. And it's even hard to imagine how you could learn something like that. It seems something that's well localized in our brain and that's there from day one, in a way. But even those neural representations are, to a degree, plastic. And one of the go-to cases is the rubber hand illusion. So you are placed in this sort of experimental setup. You are precluded from seeing your actual hand. You are seeing a fake rubber hand, and both your actual hand and the rubber hand are stroked with the same rhythm at the same time. So you actually feel this touch sensation in the same time you see the touch on the rubber hand. And what most people experience is that they feel the touch sensation drifting on their rubber hand. They're changing their representation on their own body. They are updating their representation of their own body, even if presumably representations of our own bodies are innate and hardwired, and a pretty important part of our neurocognitive mechanisms. Another very famous case is with macaques and their ability to use rakes. What appears to happen is this, that after using the rake, the neurons coding for basically the area of space that you can reach enlarge their receptive field to cover the sort of, the area you can cover with the rake. And again, that's presumably a hardwired representation of what you can reach or what your body can reach, which you have never learned. That's innate, that's hardwired, but still plastic to a sense. And so the stimulus, when looked properly, I would like to say, is old enough to punch, so to speak, our A-leaf realizing cognitive machinery. And the A-leaf realizing cognitive machinery is plastic enough so that it can learn to interact with textual linguistic stimuli. And that, if you think about it, is not so different from what happens when you learn to react to your own native language. your own native language can't be hardwired in your brain, but your language detection system presumably is, and yet is plastic enough to be able to learn the irregularities of English, which I suppose is your first language. And the same can happen and seems to happen and presumably happens when it comes to text-based language. Okay, I thank you for your attention, and I give you my and Giacomo's email. Thank you.
We have about 15 minutes for questions. Well, yeah.
Thank you for that. That was really fascinating, and I apologize for my tardy entrance. So discernment in media is not natural. It's trained. And as an example, I would just say you showed a slide and said, no one would say this little girl is not surprised. Well, I would. I work with actors all the time, and she's an actor. She's acting surprised. She isn't actually surprised. So you know, that's a specific level of media training that allows me to discern perhaps more than somebody who is just taking it at face value. And I guess what I'm wondering then is will AI train us out of A-leaf and into B-leaf? Because you believe she's surprised.
That's fascinating. The correct answer is I don't know. I perhaps would need the crystal ball to know what will happen in the future to answer on whether AI will train us. If the question is, can we train ourselves so that AI don't pull us in sort of social interaction, then the answer is perhaps, but it is very hard, because in many cases, it's extremely hard to not get steered by your A-leaves. The go-to case where to sort of exemplify this kind of difficulty is with implicit attitudes. You can't be explicitly convinced and sincerely believe that outgroups of various kinds are equal to you, but you implicitly have bodily response that suggests that you are still on the defensive. So the question, the answer is perhaps yes, but it seems very hard.
Can I follow up?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that right?
There's plenty of time.
So when I first started using ChatGPT a few years ago, the danger that I immediately felt the alarm bells ringing were actually in the way that ChatGPT used the word I. So I would say, no, that's actually incorrect when it gave me an answer to something. And ChatGPT would respond with, I'm sorry. And I believed it. I mean, momentarily, I'm sophisticated enough not to fully believe that some person said I'm sorry. But I guess my question to follow up is, do you think that if AI systems were restricted from using first person pronouns, that would help to cauterize the tumble into belief?
I don't think that, yes, that would help. And one of the big security measures we have is that when asked, large language models are forced to deny that they're a person, that they have feelings, that they're conscious, and so on and so forth. So the more you force them to respect those sort of barriers or to interact in non-human-like ways, the more the pool of your A-lieving system gives way. The more you are able to be guided only by your explicit belief. a big problem is that I don't think anyone wants to actually get entirely rid of human-like features in ChatGPT and such, because they're what makes them easy to use. It's super easy to ask a quote-unquote person, please give me this piece of information. It's very hard to code a machine so that it scrapes the internet to give you that piece of information. So the answer is yes, it will help, but I'm not say optimist about the prospects of designers of ChatGPT, OpenAI, and such, forcing them not to use first-person pronouns and humanistic languages more generally.
Rob?
Thanks for the talk. So some colleagues and I recently submitted a manuscript on what people believe in magic. And the conclusion we came to is that there's actually theories have claimed that there's one reason why people believe in magic, but there's actually different attitudes covered by magic. So similarly, in this case, it could be some people sincerely believe, some people hold A-leaves, some people, the fictionalist account works. So why should we believe that there's one account that covers all of them? And just a quick other issue, the other thing that we covered in this is that people sometimes lie about what their beliefs are. And I would suspect, and I've got a lot of research evidence saying that people will say they believe lizard people rule the world, and all sorts of stuff in social science surveys where they don't actually believe any of these things. So my suggestion is just there's lots of attitudes, and we shouldn't think that one theory covers them all.
Yeah, so I guess that's the reason to go with, or start at least with, one cover-all explanation is that it's more parsimonious. And until we have sufficient data to suggest that more explanation are needed, we should sort of aspire to have a one cover-all explanation. That's a sort of procedural answer, but it's the only answer I can give you. As for people lying, yes, that's a problem. And I'm starting to fear that's a problem without a solution. So even if you have a cooperative participant answering as sincerely, as faithfully as they can to your survey is still prompting them to certain answer. And the alternative is, of course, to go without surveys and just scrape, for example, the internet to see how people talk about and think about ChatGPT in naturalistic context. But the problem is that you don't have control upon this sort of thing. So you're not guaranteed to find what you look for, and you're not even guaranteed that what you're looking for are people reporting sincerely what they feel and not people trolling, for example.
Thank you. That was really interesting. I had a question around so I think that like the name of this talk was like people A-leaving the ChatGPT lost. And I wonder how, like, if you could, because there was nothing in your talk around like the way that kind of ChatGPT or any of these LLMs, how kind of they're sycophantic and they, I mean, there seems to be a lot of evidence, and I believe they do kind of make people dependent on them in some ways by being sycophantic. And we also do know that, like, especially, I guess, since COVID, or probably even before that, there are kind of these underlying kind of mental health issues. Loneliness is a big problem. And it seems like something like ChatGPT that is always available, that tells you exactly what you want to hear, that is, I would argue, designed to make people dependent on them because of the amount of money that they're throwing into developing these tools that they kind of need to use as much as possible. How much that can kind of explain what is happening here, and you know, so perhaps it is kind of a dependency that is being built, and then there is this kind of like rationalization that, like, you know, I feel like it loves me, which then kind of makes the dependencies feel a bit more normal, similar to kind of like addiction, maybe not addiction, but addiction-like.
So I think there's a lot to unpack there. I would say that that's the sort of other side of the explanation. So if you are convinced by the A-leaf story, you think that people are animalistically, in a way, responding to a stimulus. And then the obvious next question is, well, what's the stimulus? And how various dimensions of the stimulus squeeze the A-leaf system of people. And in past works, we had some, I think, identified some of those dimensions, animacy. Apparently, the social embeddedness of the system is important. So the fact that ChatGPT is always with you and always socially sharing, in a way, your social embedding is extremely important. Whereas industrial robots, which are animated, self-moving, don't trigger any sort of attachment precisely because they are confined to a fairly specific and unemotional setting. So we have identified some. The manuscript is in review. Hopefully, we'll see the light of day soon. I don't think I have a complete list though, and I don't think it's easy to come up with an actual list of the perceptual features, say, of the actual features of ChatGPT that pull you in, because data there seems to be very contrasting and very frame of the question dependent. So it's a very unsatisfactory answer. I apologize, but it's the only one I have.
A question here from Alan.
Hello.
That was an interesting talk. I was just thinking about a modified version of the Turing test,
Mhm.
which you had someone who was catfishing someone and someone and an LLM. They're both telling the person that they love them, you know, trying to get them to form a relationship. So, on your view, I would feel like if someone was catfishing, so it's a person-person interaction, we normally think about that as someone forming a belief about that relationship. But how would your view sort of take that kind of interaction if you understand the kind of setup? So when we form beliefs about what someone else thinks about us, that seems like quite a natural, intuitive way to talk about it. But you're suggesting that when people are interacting with the LLM, it's an A-leaf, and I don't understand why we can distinguish between those two cases.
Well, if you believe in, pardon the pun, beliefs and A-leaves, they can pull you in different directions, but they can also pull you in the same direction. And in most of the cases, they do. So when I'm looking at you, I have rich social stimulus that's squeezing my A-leaf machinery, orienting me towards having a social interaction. And then I have my beliefs suggesting that you are a person with mental states, blah, 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 blah. And that too orients me towards a social interaction. If you were a robot and I knew you were a robot, and for whatever reason I believe that robots are not conscious and don't have mentality, then there would be this kind of discrepancy. My perceptual stimulation, say, would suggest me, hey, there's someone there. There's my best self, in a way, my explicit belief, and hopefully reflective self would sort of trying to stop the social interaction from happening. And in the case of catfishing, they're just pulling me in the same direction. I think that the person catfishing me is a person, and I also believe that there's someone there with good intentions, blah, 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 blah. I'm just wrong.
Any other questions?
Yeah, exactly, very common. And so you very often use the word hardware, and I was wondering, are there any like basic evidence that our this kind of building for the ChatGPT is the product of some kind of evolutionary ancient mechanism? Because I was thinking some other maybe developmental but they also produce this kind of cognitive patterns that is cognitively impenetrable. For example, some hunter-gatherers in the like Pacific Islands, they will not get into the vanilla illusion. Yeah. So Are there any evidence for them?
Okay, I don't have any evidence specific for ChatGPT. But I do think that in cases of pareidolia, for example, the fusiform face area is active. And that would be sort of a case pushing you towards the A-lieving view. So you have a presumably inbuilt face recognition device that's hijacked by a stimulus configuration that is face-like. Please come here. Okay. It's something that we could, in principle, test. I don't know of any actual tests of it, though, on the top of my head. And it would even be hard to understand what to look for in, say, an fMRI scanner, because you could technically discount any activation as, say, activation of emotional system as, well, you are actually feeling emotion rather than recognizing emotion there. So I need to think more about how that could go. And at present, I don't know of any hardcore empirical data supporting my view.
Okay, thank you. Last question, anyone? Anyone?
Hi, thank you for the talk. That was really fascinating. I think I'm in more the, like, I think more explanations of phenomena would be helpful. But I also can see that, you know, there's important parsimonious reasons for having more broad, more general explanation. I just, when I look through, when you like just scroll through your slides, I do get that feeling of like coming at the phenomenon from like the outside and looking into something that's actually quite new.
Mm-hmm.
And you were mentioning, you know, surveys and like, you know, looking Reddit posts or whatever you can find online. But have you thought of, you know, I don't know where your work is heading, but maybe potentially, you know, doing field work or working with anthropologists or other ethnographers that could look at this phenomenon more from the inside to generate potential explanations of, or derive some insight into what people actually experience when they're interacting with these models. Yeah. I would just love your thoughts on it.
Yes, so I'm open to the idea. I would love to. There are two practical obstacles to me doing field work. One, I'm lazy, and second, I don't know anyone doing this sort of work near me and in a position in which we can actually practically cooperate. I know of people doing work on mental state ascriptions versus how can I put it in super simple that versus information processing ascription and how people do those in regards to robots. But all their data are still unpublished, and I don't know what she actually discovered with this sort of work.
I find there's a lot of cultural variation there as well.
Yes.
Especially mental state descriptions. Some cultures may not rely on these descriptions as much as we do in the West, perhaps.
Yes, there's a nice paper by, I don't remember who, but it's fairly easy to find if you search for mental state ascriptions or perception of mentality in high schoolers, and they tested Italian versus Japanese high schoolers. And apparently, and to me surprisingly, Japanese high schoolers are way more prone to ascribe mentality to natural phenomenon versus artificial, whereas for Italians, the trend is reversed. Could be Arras and Serraqui, 2005 on IEEE, but I'm not sure. Could be that.
Thank you very much. We'll finish it there. Let's thank Marco one more time.
Thank you for your attention.